You're
I'm saying it's meaningless.
So if I finish the point that I'm trying to make, instead of you interrupting before the point can be completed,
okay.
The Han Chinese, for instance, have an ethnic majority and supremacy, and they experience what one would define as a privilege.
Okay.
But it's not because it's white privilege.
Yeah, it's Han privilege, sure.
It's just majority privilege. A nation's ethnic and cultural majority tends to dictate what they want and what they expect.
Okay.
That will never go away nor change.
In this video, we joined Tim Pool and the crew on Timcast IRL. Tim Pool had some soy boy beta cuck progressive guests in the studio. With that, let's watch Tim Pool destroy a couple of woke idiots.
Suicide rates, that's a pretty good
No.
Just going up.
I think it's quite simple. I mean, happiness is relative, it's subjective, and humans adapt. But the fact that we have a large portion of the younger generation of men, their NEETs, not in employment, education, and training, is indicative of a failure of our society towards men.
Yeah.
Women are more likely to go to university and graduate than men by like what? It's like 60-40 now.
But their suicide rates are up as well, right? I would say men are better at everything, so that's why we kill ourselves more, because we're better at it, and they're more likely to do. I mean, people always bring up gun deaths, right? Like I think half of them, there's like 13,000 of them per year. Liberals will complain
Mostly
about this, and like
suicides.
most of them are suicides. And like if you have a gun, it's easier, and women tend to do things like what, like wrist
Pills.
stuff, pills, things that you can recover from. And I think like it's one of those things where people are unhappier in the trends right now because of what you're talking about, because you look at your boomer dad and your Gen X dad, and it's like, well, what the fuck? Like, you got all these opportunities, and I don't get any of these, and there's all these expectations. It's like, what's the big lie of, like, just go to college, you'll be successful? And, like, I graduated college. I was one of the lucky ones. A lot of people just didn't get jobs out of college. They're struggling. I can't afford a house. The only people I know in my generation, I'm 29, that have a house are the two engineers that got married. And even then, they're not in California. They're in, like, Colorado. They're in, some other place where the cost of living is much easier. So like I think this idea that this is because of the demonization of men is not nearly so borne out as it is people had this expectation of what life was supposed to be, and it's just not happening. And so all these, like, as a whole, society in our generation is more unhappy because we're not getting what we want. We don't have the house. We don't have the white picket fence.
So once again, the issue is if you're an 18-year-old white man and you grew up in a society, you've experienced no privilege.
Why do you say that? No privilege. Like when I say because you don't have the Gen X privilege, right? You don't have that economy. But when it's like, hey, like, because again, I hate the word privilege here, because it's like you don't feel the idea of black people are your cops are less likely to attack you
because that's
you're black,
not
right. Because
what I would say is the challenge with what you're describing is it's based on class for the most part. It's with sometimes a racial component.
I was reading a study actually from, I want to say this is it's on a book called How Fascism Works, which is like the most liberal book I could have brought up here. But it was talking about the hiring practices of people who report themselves as former convicts. And it was like black versus white, not a former convict, black versus white, former convict. And for like the black who are not a former convict, the percentage of whether or not you get hired is already like 10 times lower or something ridiculously low. And then for the black convict level, even the white former convicts were getting like hired at like a 10 to 5% higher rate. It does seem like there is at least this product of, and people call that privilege. I don't like that, because if I'm a white guy not getting hired, I don't feel privilege, right? That's why I don't like the word.
So the issue is there's no such thing as white privilege. That is a fact statement, not an opinion.
What do you mean by that? Because what I just described is what people mean. Because I think that's a bad word.
Because you can when you're trying to determine any kind of like fact basis in science.
I think probably most people watching would agree that white privilege is something that has been designed to divide people. It makes everyone say white people are treated differently. Other races, especially black people, are treated poorer, much poorer, and they aren't going to receive opportunities, benefits that people just like them receive, but have a different color skin. Just introducing this idea into society is like just pouring kerosene on a flame. And I always describe, racism in the United States as a flame that really wants to die out. It's at the end of its wick. But there are obviously forces like race grifters, whatever you want to call it, the system, the establishment that wants us divided. So we're not looking at all of the nefarious stuff that they're getting up to, and they want to make it about black versus white instead of the people versus the establishment, because they know if we ever unify and say, hey, we're not each other's problem, it's the system or the establishment, let's join forces and go against them, they know they'd be cooked. But it's an adage old as time. United we stand, divided we fall. If the races would unite and realize we're all human beings in the United States, the electorate, the voters, the public would have so much more power. So while we talk about all this political stuff and everything, I think there are people on both sides of the aisle, in the establishment, the elite, the system, whatever you want to call it. They want us preoccupied with hating one another. And I go out of my way to be hyper aware of that and try to factor that in when I'm thinking about a news story. You know, is it trying to distract us from something else that's going on? Anyway, I went on a little too long there. Let's get back to the video.
Science, we look for controls. And when you look at any other non-white nation, these concepts don't exist. However,
we're a unique nation.
Similar,
like the history
meaningless.
of racism.
Similar.
No, I'm saying it's meaningless.
So if I finish the point that I'm trying to make, instead of you interrupting before the point can be completed,
Okay.
The Han Chinese, for instance, have an ethnic majority and supremacy, and they experience what one would define as a privilege.
Okay.
But it's not because it's white privilege.
Yeah, it's Han privilege, sure.
It's just majority privilege. A nation's ethnic and cultural majority tends to dictate what they want and what they expect.
Okay.
That will never go away nor change.
Well, I think it can change. I think if
Well,
expectations change.
well,
But you just
so-
described it. The point is,
So the point that I was making,
you're agreeing with the concept, which you
there's
clearly
no
get
white
it.
privilege.
But,
And if you
but
are a
there's
Gen Z white man, you've never experienced such a thing. So when they say, you know, white guys would go and apply for a job, they'd get it. And now a 17-year-old white guy applies and they go, no white people, get out. And he goes, there's no privilege because there
no
isn't.
white people. I'm sure this has happened before, but like, is there like a massive influx of people like we don't hire white people? I mean, first of all, it's literally
Yes.
illegal, right?
It should be, but this is typically what the left supports. So we actually interviewed a pro skateboarder
supporting the idea of we can't hire white men. Like,
Absolutely.
They're
They're
supporting the idea of like I work at
Floyd era went in the to people of color to women in the S&P 100 or something.
boosting a marginalized group is not the same as saying no white men. If there are people that say you cannot hire white men,
it is
it's
a matter
not because
of
you're
policy.
assuming it's a
illegal
zero-sum
to
game.
hire white men.
Yeah, no. Wait, what? It's illegal to hire a white man?
If he started a company and all he were hiring were white men, T minus what until a lawsuit comes in? They would be investigated. You cannot start an S&P 100 company or some serious company without hiring at least some women, some minorities. So it's illegal to hire based on merit, which yes, in practice makes
that's
it
not illegal to
hire
be
white
hired
men.
based on merit, first of all, because the idea that
Sure it
like
is.
no, because you're describing it like they just found a black woman on the street and they're like, get in here, right? Versus like, hey, when you look at a pool of qualified candidates, you can't select one race, which is a very different thing. And it's not a zero-sum game. You have a bunch of different slots. If it was one slot and you're like, for this one job, you can't hire a white guy. I think like the only thing that would ever make sense for that is if you're like casting for a show and it's
Well,
like,
so,
hey,
I mean,
this character's black, right?
But it is a fact that this happens. That white guys are passed over.
Right, but you're
Affirmative
describing
action
it as
exists.
a phenomenon that is so widespread that every 18-year-old zillennial is experiencing this, which is, at least in my experience, is like growing up in this progressive area, in the most progressive place on the planet. This is not happening. I'm not getting discriminated against for being white. Like I said, I'll get some insults here or there, but it's not
It's
like
called being
well, hold
discriminated
on.
against for being white, yes.
Okay, sure, but not on an institutional level for jobs. Like no
How would
one's
you
like
know?
we're not
What are you
hiring.
comparing it to?
I'm comparing it to like every other white person that I graduated with, like all the white people around me. Like none of these people are
Generations
struggling.
don't experience the same thing as the other generation. Like literally, Gen Z men are struggling.
I am in Gen Z technically, and I grow up around, I hang out with a lot of younger people because I had a deferred college like graduation. So.
Would you agree that Gen Z men are struggling?
Yes, absolutely, but I don't think it's because of white men discrimination.
I didn't say it.
If you like watching videos like this one, like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video.
It's a component.
Yeah.
The point is when the left comes out and says we want affirmative action in hiring and colleges and public contracting, the 17 or 18-year-old white man is going, whatever it is you think boomers got, I don't have, I don't get. So when you create a racially discriminatory system, you have created a privilege for certain classes of people.
Yeah, in that specific thing. Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I was talking about. Like, you don't, even if, like, just for a second, assume that the phenomenon that we both agree exists is called white privilege, just because that's what people call it. It exists insofar as, like, yeah, this person might be preference in this specific area, or, you might not just face the same problem as a black person here, but you don't experience white privilege. You don't. I don't feel the absence of something. Well, you agree the majority group in control is going to have some sort of like in-group preference for that same
which
group,
for
right?
the past 15, 20 years has been liberal left. So they're white critical.
To an extent. I mean, our country is not like a liberal left majority ruled by. They're not like the majority.
When
of
Jack Dorsey was in
institutions.
charge of X, for instance, if you post FBI crime stats, you'd get banned.
I'm sorry, your example of whether or not white men or liberals are in control is just Twitter not allowing like
Perhaps I
like,
could
hate
describe
speech
it as
posting, like-
Facebook, YouTube, and X, the 3 largest social media
Right.
platforms in the country
Social
and the
media
world,
is a big component of our
banning
lives,
people
but-
for posting fact data because it was deemed racist.
Yeah, but that's not just posting the fact data. Almost if you're posting like 1350 stuff, it's because you're trying to paint a greater narrative of, oh, black people have a crime gene or something.
I have this personal story I've never told because I've never wanted it to appear like I'm complaining, because I'm not. But this idea of, starting a company with all white guys, you'd be investigated. And, Tim says someone goes to apply for a job, they say no white guys. I don't know, maybe there's instances where someone said that. Like, you're opening yourself up definitely to some questions about the fairness of your hiring practices. What I think is more common, and whether DEI is in place or affirmative action is in place, or if there is this societal expectation, from activist groups and things like that make a big stink out of it, all of those things contribute to, especially large companies, not wanting to be on the radar of any of these groups. So just to cover their ass, even if DEI, affirmative action, everything goes away, there will still be the race hustling groups out there, activist groups saying how bad that minorities have it in the United States. And there will be politicians echoing that sentiment. So there will always be in the back of the mind of people who run really large companies, we don't want to be on their radar for that stuff. So where I'm going with this is, just because I don't formally say we hire this race of people, a company doesn't have to say, okay, for this position, we're only hiring this type of person or this race or this gender. It can be unspoken, or it can be said behind closed doors. Very quickly, my story is I had a long history with the company I worked for. I was in sales for a long time. I wanted to move into another department. I had worked closely in sales with all of the folks that were in that department, including the hiring manager. We actually had a personal friendship. So for this open position, I got reports back from everyone, because I was close with people, that I had knocked, my interviews out of the park. I spent like a day interviewing, and some of the people I knew, some of them I didn't, but just got raving feedback. And without a formal letter, even during the interview with the hiring manager, who I had a past relationship with, I said, hey, what's your timeline? When are you looking to get started? And he said to me, let's start tomorrow. It was kind of joking because it was in a different state, but essentially I was told, you got the job. And then I just didn't hear from anybody for a while. And I wasn't even hearing from people I was close with. Like, I wasn't getting return phone calls. And it was like, wait a second, I had literally been mentally preparing to move to another state for this job. And I found out long afterwards, and you could tell, and I understand the position that my friends were put in. They wanted to say something, but they were very, very nervous. Bottom line is, it had come down from the tippy top of we're talking like Fortune 100 company. So all the way down to, a position that I was going for, kind of mid to upper level, but not even close to the top of the organization. But the edict had kind of been sent down for that job in particular, hire someone that didn't look like me. And I had a very close friend basically say, I'm risking everything I have to tell you this, but here's what happened. And they'd been directed to hire someone that didn't look like me. And that was it. And I don't tell that story because I don't like when people complain about, I didn't get this and I deserved it. We don't deserve anything. And that's just how it was at the time. But you don't have to just say, we're only going to hire this race of people, or we won't hire this race of people, in a public statement. That can just be understood between managers, management, discussions behind closed doors. Anyway, sorry for the long story. Let's wrap it up.
So you're not disagreeing with me?
I'm saying that if you're using the example of like, oh, look at our institutions and how they're overwhelmingly liberal. If you're talking about social media, yeah, they were for a while. I think that has since shifted, obviously, especially
and major
Twitter.
cities, institutions are liberal as well.
Major cities, yeah. But if you're talking about like the country as a whole, jobs, like all these places, this is not like everything everywhere. Like it is absolutely part of it, 100%. And like half the country, sure, is like liberal, progressive, not progressive, liberal at the very least. But the idea that like that is the same as saying like a white majority in group is just not like borne out. There's not like, I guess you might say like certain people might discriminate against your politics in certain areas. Definitely in San Francisco, I've had people who are, MAGA leaning at the least. But like, that is not the same as like a white in-group preference. This is like
there's not a debate on this issue. This is a fact statement that we had Supreme Court hearings over as to liberal institutions not admitting hiring white people.
But that's not what I'm saying.
Now,
You're saying, does this happen? I'm saying, yeah, obviously. I'm saying this is not the widespread concept of America, is this in-group privilege for white liberal progressives or liberal progressives. Like, I just don't think that's the case.
No, it's anti-white.
We want to hear from you guys. I think there's a lot that could be commented on in this video that I certainly didn't get to. Let us know what you think in the comments. Anyway, as always, really appreciate you watching, and we will see you on the next one.